Hello guys, and we are here today with not a discussion on the ban list, but more of a discussion on the tiers, on a tier system in the game of Yugioh. Now, as we see here, this is the current new ban list with the amount of cards equal to what they're at. So D-Mark is at 3 and Tragodia is at 3. There are a couple of cards in here that aren't on the ban list, such as DDR. I just put that in here to show that you could use it to summon out Dark Magician or Chaos and then get it back. But these are all the cards that are limited, semi-limited, or will put to 3. These are the extra deck monsters that will put to 1, and these are the ban cards. And I'm not talking about the ban list. I'm talking about tier systems here, because something I feel in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh is that there are certain decks that don't need support, like Upstart, like Chicken Game, that don't need things like Waving Eyes, but because all decks can't play them, or play them at 3 for Upstart's case, the advantage just goes back to the deck that's better. And the meta is always better. It's always going to have the most powerful monsters. It's going to have the best plays. And so when you say that everybody can't run 3 Upstarts, and that means everybody's consistency is hurt, and so that means it just by default, it goes back to the meta being the best deck. So I want to talk about a tier system and how I feel a tier system would work in Yu-Gi-Oh! So one of the first things is that the tier system isn't about the deck lists. Like if you win Worlds, it's not like your deck list instantly becomes tier 1. No, it's based on archetypes, even combination of archetypes. So Konami could say like Prophecies and Spellbooks. That's obviously those guys work together. Trap Tricks, Trap Hole, those things go together. So they can group those two technically different archetypes into one archetype. And so and then in order to be considered playing an archetype, you have to be running at least 10 cards. I say at least 10 because that means you could run 3 cards at max and you'd be running 9 cards, and I feel like that's a decent amount. If you're running 4 cards, that's 25. If you're running 10 cards, that's 25% of your deck. You're running that archetype, I feel. And so 10 cards I feel is pretty decent. Again, they could be combos of different decks. So like during the hat format, when there was Trap Tricks, Artifacts, and Hands, they could put all those archetypes into one section and say if you're running 10 combinations of Trap Tricks, Artifacts, or Hands, then you are considered to be playing that deck. And so that's how you figure out what archetypes you're playing. So of course, like Draco, Pals, and the whatnot, that would be probably a tier 1 deck, and the whatnot. And so going into what each tier is and how each tier works is tier 1 decks. This is where it would become complicated for Konami, is that they'd have to do more information gathering, because the top 5 most popular decks would be tier 1, I'd say. And so when you're filling out your deck list, you'd have to list what archetypes your deck fills. And it's possible to fulfill a total of 4 different archetypes. Or actually, it's possible to fill 6 different archetypes if you're running a 60-card deck and each 10 cards are a different archetype. Which wouldn't be a good deck, probably. But you'd have to list all the archetypes that your deck fulfills. And of course, it's going to be the highest tier or the lowest number that they have their ban list. And the tier system isn't necessarily supposed to have like different ban lists for each tier. They're supposed to have the default ban list, so everybody follows this ban list, but then each tier has different regards to generic cards. Like tier 1, they'd have 1 Upstart, they'd have 1 Strike, 1 Twin Twister, and stuff like that, so that way, and they still have their plays. Like it wouldn't hit Luster Pendulum. In order for Luster Pendulum or Mon Keyboard or Joker to get hit, you'd have to they'd have to update the default ban list, and the default ban list, which is this, still exists. It would still definitely very much exist as a thing. And so then this would just be added on. Alright, if you're playing a tier 1 deck, 1 Strike or 1 Twin Twister or something along that lines. While a tier 2 decks would focus more on those OTKs, those FTKs, like the Chicken Games, like Yugioh, like Magical Cylinder, Magical Explosion, just those different FTKs, and then they'd say, alright, you get one Upstart, one Royal Magical Library, stuff like that, because obviously Exodia still has to be playable, because it's so key to the game's lore and the anime, so they'd hit some cards to make it slow down, to make it so they don't have stuff, but everybody else would still be able to play Upstart and Chicken Game because they're not abusing it. And then Tier 3 decks, I feel, would be the default banlist. Like, there would be literally no change. And the decks that go there are new archetypes. So if an archetype is released in a set, until the next set, or until Konami decides, because they are the ultimate choosers, they follow the default banlist. Now, I understand that some archetypes are released over multiple banlists, such as Draco Slayers. So they could continue to stay at Tier 3, or they might go up to Tier 1 if they're the top 5 most popular decks, of course. Or if they aren't being played like UAs, they could go down to Tier 4 after their first release and continue to gain more support. So, I mean, again, it's all up to Konami and whatnot. And then Tier 4 decks, it's kind of like the cards that aren't on the list, and on the ban list, where it just has the cards that were released that were on the ban list. So there won't be a huge amount of names. It'll just have a couple of names that are now at Tier 4, and then we'll say what cards they can also play. So it won't be a lot of cards. Like, they will have like maybe 2, I wouldn't even say 3 cards that are banned at 1. So, like, and they'd be completely different. It wouldn't be like you'd get Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity if you're playing a Tier 4 deck. No, you'd be getting like Pot of Greed and Trapdoor Shoot, or Pot of Greed and, oh god, I can't, like Greedox. Something that just doesn't mix and isn't crazy. So that way people, like, the decks aren't crazy, and stuff like that. Obviously, Tier 4 decks won't have Yada and Chaos Emperor and Dragon Lego and stuff like that. But they might have Chaos Emperor and Dragon. They might have Yada at one point separately. And of course, Konami can always change what cards in each tier are getting hit, what cards are restricted, what cards they are allowed to play, and the stuff like that. So if a deck does become big, if it just pops out of nowhere and it's like, oh, it's just destroying meta, well, again, if it's the top 5 most popular deck, if it's in that range, then would instantly go to Tier 1. Well, if Konami updated the tier system list, just like if Konami updates the ban list. So we'd still be dependent on Konami with this system, but I still feel it would be a great system. And so if this deck that was running ban cards, that running the 2 ban cards and they were really good, it would go up to Tier 1. It'd have to follow those restrictions. It'd have to follow, and they'd have to instantly get rid of those 2 ban cards that they were playing, and they'd probably lose support and drop out of the format. In which case, once the tier system got updated again, it would fall either into Tier 3, or Konami could just release it back into Tier 4, and by then Konami should have changed what cards are allowed to be played for Tier 4 decks. And so the entire purpose of this tier system is just to make it more fair. Because again, like I'm saying, nobody can play 3 Upstarts, so it instantly goes to the better decks. So Draco Palace, Monarchs, Cosmos, those are better decks. And so they just gain the advantage because now both decks have the same consistency, while, like, if they were facing a Quasar deck, Quasar needed triple Upstart for that consistency, so that way it could summon out Quasar. And sometimes you could beat big decks just because you summoned out Quasar. And but now, because you don't have as much consistency in the deck, granted though you do have 2 Allure, it's the same. So I feel that the advantage stays with the deck that's inherently better. And so this tier system, I feel, would make the game more fair by saying, alright, Draco Pals, you'll round 1 Strike, 1 Twin Twister. I mean, they'll find other stuff to play. I mean, they'll play other trap cards. They'll play MST, or the new card that's going to come out, pay 1,000 to target a spell or trap card and banish it. There's a card that has that effect. So they'll find other cards to run for their generic support. And again, it's just hitting the generic support. That's what the tier system should do. It shouldn't be hitting keyboard. It shouldn't be hitting Joker. That's what the default ban list. That's what the solid ban list that everybody follows, except for the adjustments made by their tier. And of course, the other thing that Konami would have to do is they'd have to list everything that is considered playing that archetype, because it would be kind of awful if you were playing an Odd Eyes deck and you played him and maybe a couple other cards or something like that, and you would consider playing Perform Pals and stuff like that, because I don't think there's even 10 Draco Pals stuff right now. There's Overlord, there's 7, you'd have to include Draco Face Off in order for there to be 10. No, you wouldn't have to include, because if you included the extra deck, that's 1, the XZ, the Fusion, so that's 3, 4, so yeah, it would be exactly 10 if you ran one of each of the extra deck monsters, 1 Luster, and then 3 Overlord and 3 of the normal monsters. So you wouldn't even need to, but they might include, sometimes they might include cards that say Draco Slayer, just like how the Magician monsters say, the new Dark Magician supports say, add a card in your hand if it lists Dark Magician in its deck. They may also include cards that list Draco Slayer, the support cards pretty much as part of that archetype, which would be bad, because again, if you were playing Joker, it would be considered a Magician and Odd Eyes, and a Perform Pal card, Sky Iris, would be considered the same thing, and so, But I mean, those are just small discrepancies that Konami can resolve and stuff like that, and I don't feel it would be an awful issue. But again, I feel like overall it would be very much better for the game, because a lot of people complain about, why aren't Glad Beasts good? Why aren't this deck good? Why am I always losing with this deck? Well, besides the fact that you're not playing meta and this game is meta driven, it's because when those decks were good, it was because of the cards that were legal at the time, the cards that were good at the time. Like if you've ever been watching Lithium's Banlist Cup, the decks win because of what they have. If they have Heavy Storm, that's a huge advantage for that deck. If they have Triple Vanity, that's a huge advantage for that deck. And they win based off those generic supports. Not necessarily the deck or the archetype that's being played. It's all about the support that it has. And so by hitting that stuff, I feel it would help balance out the different levels of decks and just make the game more fun. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion. Tell me guys what you think of a tier system. I mean, I'm really much against Upstart and Chicken Game and their limitations. Do like a lure though. So thank you guys for watching. See you guys later. Bye.